right. Okay, so last time I was here, we had the big talk. Are we going to continue with Storyteller? Are we going to go to something else? We embarked down the road of trying to make large-scale improvements to Storyteller, trying to get a better experience. So that's what I'm going to show today. Try to just kind of show you what I've been thinking, what I've been putting together, start getting some feedback, and just kind of let you see where things are at right now. For a tiny bit of background, for those of you that might have kind of joined after we adopted Storyteller, the original goal of Storyteller, it's not quite how we use it, but it's how we would want to use it someday. The idea of executable specifications, that you would actually use this to define your low-level requirements, that your requirements are expressed as something very concrete, very detailed, something with no ambiguity, something that could be turned into a regression test later. Another way that people have described this in the past is the idea of an example test. The systems we have that are more about number crunching or deriving the correct value or determination, any place we can turn a test into expression of it like a decision table, that's the kind of thing Storyteller was meant for. It's certainly not a replacement for Karma or in-unit or X-unit or any of our unit testing kind of tools. It can be valuable for kind of intermediate level integration testing, just because of all the work we've done to make it easier to set up and verify big chunks of data, system state, things like that. But primarily, it was the old ancient agile dream of acceptance test-driven development or executable specifications. I'd let you call this behavior-driven development, but I've never entirely thought of it that way. But I think that's an okay way to think about this too. So the problems that we're having today, performance is a severe problem. It is arguably a very severe problem, with our big project taking 10 hours to complete all of its regression runs. That's probably the main problem, I think. The usability has never been great. I have kind of an old mentor friend that likes to run around and say one of his favorite saying is that we all wrote some really terrible code 5 years ago, and big pieces of Storyteller are more than 5 years old. The UI is crufty. It never kept up with the time. It was built in the days when jQuery was the hottest, shiniest thing on the planet. It has not kept up with where we were. And plus, everybody wants the WPF stuff to be gone. Fair statement? I don't ever want to code with WPF again. The learning curve has been an issue. I want to say that that's probably mostly a matter of the lack of documentation and maybe not having spent enough time explaining what is possible in the tool. I think my only real proposal to beat that is trying to do the documentation and maybe spending more time on the team floors as we can. But so the work that's ongoing with Storyteller 3 right now, to be very transparent, it's very, very close to a full rewrite. The new client is a web client, so it shares none of the old code with the WPF. The .NET engine on the back end that actually runs the specs, I had thought earlier that I was going to keep that engine mostly the same. I think I told you that before. Looking at it from a performance angle, there was a lot of fat in what it was doing that I'll talk about later. So that became a full rewrite. I pulled a little bit of code from the old one as it worked, brought it in. But I did have at least all the existing sample tests and pretty good specification of what the test engine was supposed to do from the old code. That the new engine is passing and working the same way, at least for that large sample set of what the system is supposed to do. So what I've got so far, I'll flip in a demo in just a second. So I had a series of sample tests in the Storyteller 2 code that was just there to try to exercise anything that the engine did. I believe that it was pretty comprehensive. There may be some things that fell off to the side that we'll discover later. But the new engine with those sample tests being able to basically produce the same results, it's giving me a level of confidence enough to move on. So the engine itself is there. I'm going to show in just a second. I have the command line tool that runs the specifications that we would use for continuous integration. I'll show in just a second. That's ready to go. And the new client itself, getting a little sloppy with terminology, but the bare bone minimum viable product that you would have to have in order to conceivably use this thing on an actual project is very close to being done. That being said, there's a world of usability improvements that we could and probably should make. Just showing a quick demo. So I'm just going to run what would be the command line call. And Sam, there's a new flag that showed up in Storyteller 3, Sam, where you at, to open the results after you run this, but this was not in 2, so that can't be what was opening the browser for you. Yeah. Really, it's just here for me to help do the demos. So I'm going to pop and run this real quick. And the sample project here, it's not doing anything very expensive, so the tests are going to run very fast. The only one that is slow is just because I have a lot of thread.sleeps to see what it does. So these tests are all generally rigged up to fail, so I can test failure conditions. There's a few successful ones. So this isn't that dissimilar to what we already had as far as the report. The advantage in this new world order is the report file is one gigantic HTML file. So all the CSS, all the JS is piped directly into the HTML page, and there's a ton of JSON for all the test data itself. So one file, if you need to keep it later, copy it around, grab it, it's there. So not as much file system pollution on the TeamCity box. Keeping the same rules. For those of you who may not be familiar with the life cycle rules in Storyteller, we say that tests, kind of like the way that a bill becomes a law in the old cartoon, Storyteller specification should start out as an acceptance test. This is something that's a work in progress. It's something that we've defined as a piece of behavior the system's supposed to do. In this run here, all the tests that are acceptance, we're going to run these specifications, but if they fail, we're just going to report it. We're not going to fail the CI build itself. When your build graduates and becomes a law, and this test starts to work, you're going to flip it to the regression lifecycle. Once it's in regression, any failure with regression is going to fail the build. Okay? Old hat for those of you who've already used Storyteller. This is taken from some very early Agile projects. I was around a decade ago. Just talk about it. So I know some of you are familiar with the retry capabilities in Storyteller. From a command line perspective, when you're running in continuous integration, we have some limited retry capability of the specifications. Specifically for those tests you hit with a lot of asynchronous behavior, where you just never quite get the weights quite perfectly. In those cases, we have the retry capability such that the regression tests and the regression tests only, if they have a threshold of retry set, Storyteller, if it detects a failure at first, will actually try to run them again a couple more times based on what number you've set to see if it can get a success. This is kind of your last ditch. I can't make this test completely reliable. There's some timing issues. That's what the retry is for. That was an idea that when the people I was working with when we built Storyteller originally 5 or 6 years ago, we stole that from the jQuery team. Their own tests where they had so much asynchronous behavior that they would just punt and put some retries in. The difference today in Storyteller 3 is for right now, I moved the retries to an opt-in instead of opt-out. So you have to explicitly enable it per specification and the default maximum retry is 0. Did that specifically because of the issues we were having when the environment was wonked out, nothing could pass, but it's still trying to do it over and over and over again. Along those same lines, to try to fail faster, make Storyteller quit when it just can't work, we are detecting what we're calling critical or catastrophic exceptions inside the engine. So taking an example of a specification that's trying to open the browser to a certain page in the application. If the navigation fails, Storyteller is going to, for now, we're going to have that tell her that's a critical exception. If that fails with a 500, whatever it's going to be, that's going to turn off the retry. So the retry is really only there for timing issues. So that should help some of our runaway spec times when things are just invalid. That's the theory. Okay, just talking about the things. I'm not sure why I had 2 of those. This is a duplicate. So the things that are left to do, Serenity is our package that just acts as an adapter to host and test Fubu MVC and Fubu transportation applications in Storyteller. Very next thing I probably need to do next week is convert Serenity to the new Storyteller 3 and just try to work through some more tests, real life tests, to see how that behaves. Again, need to use this need to start applying this to existing Storyteller testing projects, find out what we do. There's a lot of UI usability things we can do. I'll show you the editor screen. It's going to be pretty easy for you guys to poke holes in it and make suggestions. And I do want to hear all of those things. I think this, and I do want to call the spec editing usability a pretty big deal. I'm thinking that's probably a week or 2 of effort. I committed yesterday to finally getting the documentation, which I think I was already on the hook for anyway. It's not that big a tool. There aren't that many things you can do with it. We'll try to have pervasive documentation within the next couple of months. And then lastly, I know there's a few odds and ends of the old Storyteller 2 that haven't been recreated for 3 yet. I'm just going to pick up the UI and the old UI and try to remember what those things are. Okay, so the new client, WPF is gone. Round of applause for that. So it's a new web application. The backend is hosted. It's a very, very small Fubu MVC application. We're hosting with Katana for right now. That does bring the normal Katana irritation. You're going to have to run this in admin mode as an admin or with sudo, just so Katana doesn't freak out. Or ask Corey how to do the workaround. Longer term, my preference would be let's finally use Noan or one of the alternatives. There are alternative Owen hosts that don't require admin privileges. But just know that somebody in this room, probably somebody's plural, is going to try to use this application and get bit by the admin thing with Katana. For those of you who remember Jason Staten that used to work here, using his Fleck library to do WebSockets, so giving him a little shout out. It's easy, it's small, it works. I'm happy with it. The front end is it's React.js using Webpack to do the building. For right now, I'm using Postal.js as the event aggregator instead of Facebook's Flex or Yahoo's Dispatcher. That, after seeing what Bob was doing yesterday, I think I like the Yahoo stuff well enough. We might incorporate that later down the line. But for right now, it's Postal. Postal's easy, though. Okay, so the goals for the new client. The biggest thing up top, trying to make it as fast as possible and mechanically easy as possible for us to author specifications. Get these done as quickly as we can. There was a show years ago. Did anybody ever watch the show Better Off Ted? Yeah. So you remember the two nerdy scientists? There was a day they were talking and they were saying, oh man, but that's using science for evil. And we said we wouldn't do that quite so often. I never got the WPF threading problems fixed. The UI, I know the existing UI crashes a lot. We're trying not to do that. The new UI, as you're running specifications, especially when you're hitting slow specifications in the UI tests or the bigger tests, you're getting much more indication of what's happening as you go. I'm not sure I have many specs that are slow enough to show this, but you're going to get to see the results come in top to bottom as they come in. So just a little more indication so you know where your spec's actually at. Longer term, I don't know. I'm not real super confident that ASP.NET V Next is going to be a reality this year, but it's going to happen within the next year or two. And I think there's a high probability we are going to realistically get to do development on OS X. So the Storyteller client, I haven't tested yet. Katana might be an issue, but we're definitely planning on making this work in OS X. And keep the Windows VM off so your battery life isn't terrible. Longer term things, this is way down the line. This is not going to happen this spring by any means. One of the dreams is that we would enable users to create the grammars, to create the specification language completely inside of Storyteller. Really just creating placeholders. There's going to be a grammar for this. So as you're sitting down with a tester or in a far off world with your business partner and you're defining up how the system is supposed to work right then and there without diving into C# code, should be able to drive the Storyteller UI and write the test language and use it right there on the spot. Those fake grammars would really act as to-dos and possibly add some level of code generation to generate at least the stub methods for you for your missing grammars. Just another way to try to get things going faster, and also to get the language, the language of the specifications out of C#, so you don't have all that god awful attribute hell everywhere. But that's a longer term thing. The crazy long term thing, and I've actually done some pencil paper work on how this could work internally. I want to be able to allow you to step through a specification kind of step by step. So instead of just running the whole thing, you would have to explicitly say, all right, go on to the next thing, down and down and down. And then also probably just say, I want you to run to this point. So when you're getting a specification that's breaking, not working, you have a better way to debug that. And especially on UI tests, where it's changing things on the browser so fast you can't follow it as you're running the spec. So if we could now say run to this point and step through and just eyeball what's going on inside the browser as it's doing this. But that's a very far off kind of thing. Yeah. So look at the new UI. Pull that up for a second. Okay, so it's just going to be a command line call. So in a console application, you'll go ST. ST is going to be the command line client for Storyteller. ST, open, and you're just going to tell it the directory. What that is, that holds your Storyteller testing project. There's other flags to override config file. Will be profile, our way of saying, do I want to use Firefox, Chrome, that kind of thing. But I'm just going to show it as this right now. So this is spinning up the FWC application itself, very small, much larger than that for the .NET folks in the house. It does pull up in a separate app domain where it actually runs the specifications. Every testing tool in .NET has to do this anyway. The delay there, where this comes up pure white, just so you know, I was worried about the time to open the browser, so I'm having it try to open the browser way before the engine itself is ready to go. That's why the browser comes up blank. I'll probably change that so that I don't try to bring the browser up until it's completely ready. So this is the new UI. It is a Jeremy written UI. For those of you who've known me for a while, not Mr. Good at CSS or web design. This is where I'm probably going to want the most feedback and probably help as well. But this is where we're starting from at a minimum. Main page, starting out, is just the Explorer. Here are all the specifications that are going to be there. I know this is going to get overwhelming as we get into bigger projects or even medium-sized projects. So we'll try to get the Control-N type functionality that we have in all our IDEs. Some kind of keyboard shortcut where you can look up get an autocomplete box and look up a spec and go straight to it. All of those kinds of things, those little usability things that we find that we're going to need, we're going to try to stuff in there to make this just as fast as possible. I don't have the collapsing tree view yet. That will be there before we drop this on Teams. Same abilities we've had before to do some of the filtering. There's just a little more UI indication of what's out there. I know that dealing with the life cycle has always been an issue of knowing what's really out there, what's still stuck in acceptance mode that I need to promote up, those kinds of things. Just trying to, with the badges, trying to give you a little more indication. So just so you can see the filtering. Nothing's run yet, so nothing's going to match there. No results. Flipping between acceptance and regression. Running a test. I'm kind of dependent on you guys a lot to kind of tell me where you don't like the usability or how this is laid out. For right now, I'm just using links, little command links written in here, because I was too lazy to try to do any kind of right-click menu and kind of thought people might hate that anyway. So I'm going to run this test here, sentences. It's rigged up with a lot of thread.sleep, so it's slow enough that you can see the progress as it goes. But getting all the normal indications you would expect. Using Font Awesome to get the icons, so it's pure CSS icons. It's been nice. So you can see the progress. Here, let me run that again real quick. So you get a little bit of indication if it's running, if it's queued, what's going on inside of it. Let me pop this. So you get a little more feedback of what's going on inside. This kind of thing, I'm finding it to be much easier to do with the React and Flex style architecture than the WPF stuff ever was. I think at this point the browser handles background threading kind of things much better than WPF ever did. Jumping into the results, things you're used to. So this is a little new. The much more intelligent navigation. In this case, the sentences here, there's already a result. So when I open it, it's going to go straight to the results page. That's a known bug. I'm not going to worry about that. So it'll go open straight in results. If it has no results, it's going to open straight in the editor. Trying to get to this to respond the way that you actually work. The existing Storyteller today is very mouse-centric, very kind of click-hungry to get around. Trying to make the navigation be a little smarter of where you go. Your results page, start here. Instead of trying to embed all of the exceptions in line, that today can make the output really, really ugly. I am depending much more on some of this stuff. Any of you guys Bootstrap guys later know how to fix the character encoding problem? Tell me next week. So it's very obviously a Bootstrap application. It's going to look extremely bootstrappy as we go. So there's just more of what the results are looking like. Very open to feedback on layout and how things are presented. Show you a little bit more of what the results are doing. Scott, we were talking about this yesterday in the meeting. The places where we're having performance problems, to try to help at least explain where the sluggishness and the slowness is, At a minimum, we are presenting performance information at the bottom of the results, just telling you where it's spending the time. All those numbers are in milliseconds. The places that look suspiciously round numbers, that's where there's a thread.sleep of 1 second to fake this out. But telling you how long is it taking to run the specification itself and where it's spending all the time. So the time to create a new, the time the engine uses to set up a brand new test run, the context creation, so setting things up, building child containers, the before spec kind of things you do to fake things out, whatever that's going to be. And then even some of the things that are hidden from the output normally, fixture setups, teardowns, how long is it taking to run every single step in the specification? So that you can start spotting, you know, where are we slow? Looking for things like, are we building a bad weight that's timing out? Is it taking too long to, probably taking too long to write things to the database, open a web page, whatever that's going to be. Let me show one, I think. The debug output that you guys already have today, that's recreated. So any debug.writeLine calls that happens in your code as you're running the specification, that shows up at the bottom. That's just keeping even with what we already had. We'll see in a little bit. I have a demo where I can show you the custom context. We do have a way to capture arbitrary HTML inside of the Storyteller results to give more contextual information. You guys that have done testing against Fubu transportation, you've already seen this. The Storyteller results, how it will have at the bottom, will have the threaded history of what messages went through, what handled it, was it handled successfully, that kind of thing. Want to extend that, do the same thing for Fubu VC at a minimum, so that at the bottom we get some kind of context of what HTTP calls happened during the specification. How long did they take? Which URL did it hit? What was the status code returned? If you're just leaving the app, assuming you're going to leave your application running inside the Storyteller UI, we'll also throw a link into the request tracing in the Fubu diagnostics. So something blows up, you got a little more contextual information to see what was happening in the application during the test. Again, going back to the performance tuning, places where we think we probably have some performance issues from being too chatty in the application, making too many AJAX calls that can be batched up. We'll try to surface in these test spec results, hey, you had this many AJAX calls going on. So those places where the code has gotten so big that you can no longer easily follow the flow of the code, at least tell you what is happening so you have some basis to know where can I start closing things down and combining AJAX calls. Any questions so far? Sorry? I've got to try it out. Yeah, I can't tell you that until I've tried it. But it won't get unleashed upon you until it is. Just some little extra stuff. The recycle, the recycle indicator here. Same thing we have in Storyteller 2. A little bit different now that there's a little more contextual information it can give you. Because I know this has been an issue here and there. Daryl, I know I've helped you through these a couple times. Storyteller 2 wasn't always very intelligent about how it handled configuration files. There was no automatic logic to figure out what to use. You had to manually copy config files around sometimes. You know, where is it trying to find binaries, that kind of thing. So try to, on one hand, make it much smarter about how it finds things. If by default you are giving an app, you're creating your app domain at the root directory of the project, so it should be able to find your app config or web config if it's there. And by default, it's going to look for web.config first, then app.config, and after that, punt. So if you're following very normal .NET idioms, it's just going to work. You can fake it all out with explicit input parameters. But if you suspect that your problem is that Storyteller is using the wrong configuration file, and we have applications that are very sensitive to that, you got a little pop-up to try to tell you what it's doing. So this is telling us in the .NET testing app domain, where is it looking for binaries, what's the base directory of the app domain, and what config file is going on. This should be the information you need to unravel those kind of problems we've had. But it should be preventing those problems too. So if this thing errors out, that indication the recycle turns an ugly red, and there'll be a big exception message in here. And that is working. I'm just not going to fake it yet. All right, here. So somebody remember that that's 1052? So it's this is the project that we're actually testing that holds the test. Let me see if I can get it to recompile just this. Oh, dist. Hang on one second. There we go. So 1104. Yeah, Lance. Yes. So let me skip around a little bit here. So it's still using the exact same XML format that we're using today, so that we can get this up and going much faster. I looked at it and thought about it. I didn't think there was enough value in trying to changing it to justify the cost. Internally, it's using a JSON representation of the exact same data to pop between the client and server, but no, we're leaving the XML format exactly the same. So when doing the engine rewrite, I'm using the exact same XML files that Storyteller 2 is using to test against. The changes that are there, when we had this big talk last time I was here, Andrew, you asked me if there were going to be API changes in the Storyteller engine, and I told you no, and I lied. Very mild. There's a few places where we're going to probably make some tweaks to how you define selection lists and headers to be more consistent. There was one place where the set verification grammars I thought were kind of egregiously bad. I changed. The biggest one is I finally got to change the internal terminology. That massive blobby test context that had everything that could possibly be in Storyteller, that became iSpec context. You will notice the terminology changed. Instead of calling things tests, I did change the terminology to specification. Wanted to do that for years. Finally did that now. The new iSpec context, the signature of that is significantly different. It's much thinner. The biggest thing we did that I think is going to break the state, the things that you kind of cache within a specification run to use later, that is completely separated from the service location to the application. Andrew, you and Zach hit that a couple times, didn't you? Yeah. So that is very specifically based on what you guys hit, but it should have been done in the first place anyway. Let me see. And try to find this test here, the one that is a little bit slower. So I'm going to run this, and you do get to see a few results popping up before the whole thing finishes. I think that's going to be a much bigger deal in the bigger, slower tests. Request from Joe that I definitely heard and hated myself. when a specification is running, we're not going to lock up that particular specification screen. So you can still see it, scroll down it, even edit it if you want to. Lance, younger me, thought that was a good idea, and I was wrong. So that's gone. Anything you're seeing here, anybody want to ask some questions about? Ron?
I didn't see teardown in the timing. Did I miss that? Okay.
Yeah, because you can be doing expensive things. It's not just set up and tear down, but the places where you have hidden actions, like in the middle of paragraphs, or if you do an action before an embedded section, those are exposed through the timing as well.
Another thing that I wanted is a way to, if the test errors out, have it just stop and just bail out completely. Is there any?
That's in Storyteller too.
Well,
you can make it stop on the first exception.
Is that a setting?
Yeah. I'll show you the UI under the projects tab. And thank you, that's a gap analysis. That same capability is still here in Storyteller 3, but I'd forgotten to have that where you could modify it in the UI. So going down that line of topic, you can tell it to stop on the first exception. You can tell it to stop on the very first failure. The spec run is very different this time around. Storyteller takes that approach of, even if something fails, I'm going to try to keep running down it to tell you all the possible results, to make that concrete. Looking at something that's more of a decision table. Oh, wow, so I've apparently got some problems there. I think we might be dead. It's pretty bad. Today, even if you get a failure, it keeps trying. Test all the conditions. It's a big decision point in how you write your run specifications. Your X unit tests will all fail on the first failure and just quit. These longer, bigger, expensive tests, you want them to run all the way. Generally, want them to run all the way through, so you can understand which of X number of the Y assertions you're doing are working. So you don't have to keep running it so many times. All right, and that's great, except when it's not. When we hit those kind of errors of, I can't open the web page, the browser yellow screens of death. Don't even try to click buttons or check text boxes or any of that kind of nonsense, because you can't. So that idea of the catastrophic exception, that exact kind of case, the specification now, Storyteller is going to quit on the spec if it sees one of those. Doesn't matter what else is down there, that's it, we're going to stop. Another way to try to rein in the runaway spec times, I think, that we're having today on CI, when things are wrong, fail fast. Ryan?
Is the saving mechanic still the same as before? Just as you edit, you can, well, let's save if you want to run the test, just kind of save automatically for you. Some of those.
Yes, and if not perfectly yes, it will be yes. Like, I don't have the dirty check to if you try to move away from a spec before you've saved it. I don't quite have that. Well, I haven't gotten around to that yet. But yeah, I'll make the mechanics be exactly the same. When you run it, it's de facto saving it. That is already there. Let's see, changes. Because the icon is still a diskette, it's still saying save on a diskette, even though I know some of you have probably never used one of those. You do have redo, undo. So we flip the editor. I'll show this off in a second. So just added a new row, threw a new number in there. Oh, well, okay. I've seen it work. You have undo, redo. It works as an event stream. So every change, it is that kind of unidirectional flow that we're going to start pursuing with React. Every edit you make, it's broadcasting a change message. It comes into the specification store, applies it, but it remembers that as a command. So the undo just goes through the stack of change commands and reverses them. So that worked out real nicely.
Does this still have that issue where you click out of the box to save it?
No. So we're dead in the water for something here, but no, I mean, that's been a problem for 5 years. Anytime you're hitting save, run, moving around, it's quietly, internally, it's quietly sending a message, hey, if any open editors have some unsaved changes, pack it in before it runs or saves. That's addressed.
Have you done any work on like reset?
What do you mean?
So one of the things I think about is like cleaning up after yourself after each test.
That's just the teardown.
Yeah. Well, that's after a grammar. I'm talking about after a test. So yeah.
So I think we're going to do a run. We're going to do another round of changes probably in Serenity. And don't we have hooks in Serenity already for after like context cleanup? Yeah. That's a cheap thing to do. I mean, the pattern, you've seen the pattern in there that if the system creates an execution context and at the end of it disposes it. If we just had the hooks to do more of your cleanup there.
Yeah.
Since you brought this up to address some of the things that you and Zach hit, so very specific to the way we use this tool. It's going to require some changes to Fubu and VC, but we'll get to it. Use the new structure map 3 child container so that you can, and use a new clean one per every single specification so that you can do things, you can fake things out in the container per that specification, and all those fakes are thrown away at the end and you roll back to the main application. So static state of any kind is death in automated testing. So we're going to keep the specifications more isolated. That deserves some clapping.
I noticed it didn't seem like it was resetting the test results when it recycles the environment.
Do you think it should?
I think so. Because the idea is you've saved something, and so your tests are no longer valid.
So what we could do is we could do the resharper runner kind of approach where it has another kind of icon that just says, I did succeed or fail last time, but I don't know that I still work that way. If you squint super hard on the resharper test runner, you can notice that when you recompile, it'll change. You'll still say green or red, but it's slightly different. Because what I don't want you to lose is the information about what did this do last time I ran this.
Mm-hmm.
I like that, but I would want to do the JetBrains approach.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of feedback I want. Part of this, the UI work I originally started, it was just going to be a little side project for fun. It was just a way for me to try to level up on UX and UI, see if I could build a non-embarrassing user interface. Let's see what else I can think about on this one. I was kind of hoping, it's not there obviously, we'd embed the documentation straight in here. The editing, just to try to explain a little more where we were going. It's always been a problem with the crude text boxes today. It's very hard to edit and also read what the specification is trying to do. I wanted to go down an approach of these cells as you go into them, cell being the piece of information you need to capture, the variables in the spec. That doesn't flip to an edit mode until you tab into it or highlight it. And when you tab off, it should go back to the read-only kind of view. Again, every little trick we can possibly do to make this more usable, I've got issues that aren't done right now. When you hit really long text in here, have the text box grow so you can read what you're typing. Maybe you guys haven't hit that. That was always an old pet peeve of mine. I do support select boxes and Boolean checkbox editors where that's appropriate. Enumerations are automatically select boxes now. It's that kind of thing's all much easier to do in the new code base. For general layout, and again, Steve, this is the kind of thing I probably need some help from John if I can get it. Today, for the moment, pick something cleaner. So we still have the same idea of, a section. I'm using a fixture called sets, and I have data inside of that I'm editing. This one is the active, the active section. So just for right now, I'm still using the old accordion kind of style. So the little UI to add things to this is way down below. I don't like it already. I never really liked it in the old one. I'm thinking that as you go into this or the other, that we move that the contextual commands over here off to the side and the left and make sure it's affixed to the top.
Just have John do some feedback.
Yeah. This screen's going to change the most before you actually use it. But try to do every kind of keyboard-centric lookup you can do so you don't have to mouse scroll a lot and click and mouse. 1 second. One of the big usability things, Ron, I know you'll appreciate this, want to make sure that you can do the reordering with drag and drop. So places where there are some places where the order of the table does matter, where you're doing ordered verifications or whatever, make sure you can drag and drop reorder. Make sure you can drag and drop reorder things within a spec. I'd like you to be able to grab things off the left. I was thinking maybe you could just put it where you want it and drop it in, but also had very keyboard-centric things to just append it to the end, more like we're used to working with the coding. Voda?
That was my question. Thanks.
Yeah, I looked at it a little bit yesterday. That was a bridge way too far for today. But I'm not sure how that's going to get pulled off. It might be that when you activate the drag, that it actually re-renders it in a lower fidelity version of all this to make the drag and dropping easier. But I don't know yet.
Is it edit inline or is there an edit line?
So originally I was thinking it would be all perfectly inline. It makes the React components have way too much if then statement kind of stuff around it. So we do still have a much cleaner pre-beta. I thought it was in better shape than this, guys. So a much cleaner display, so there's not the X's everywhere to delete things and add things. This would be something that we eventually make where you can export it and hand that off to the Jake Kramers of the world if they want to see it, or if just a tester wants to let me review the specs you wrote, give them the much cleaner HTML, and maybe even let them print it off or export it to an HTML file, so you don't have to monkey around with the UI client at the same time. But the editor itself, trying to do things very inline here, so you can still read the specification and not get so overwhelmed by checkboxes and. I know. Definitely not here today. I want the table here. Once upon a time, I had suggested using Slick Grid inside of the Storyteller UI, and Andrew, you made the most comical Calvin and Hobbes face. So we didn't do that, but have a slightly different table cell so that arrow keys work, so that you can tab through it all you want, but to make sure you can go up, down, like Excel. It's been a long time since I've had somebody tell me to just make it act like Excel. I'm due.
Was the Slick Grid as much as the 90 columns in Slick Grid?
That was just a bad UI design all the way. That whole thing was just cursed. Good job.
Today plus one?
So that if you're doing that's a trick I've used for years. If you're testing business logic that's very date sensitive, it's a pain. It can be a very much a pain in the ass to use absolute dates and faking the clock and doing all those kinds of things where you always have to constantly calculate, okay, this date from 5 years ago compared to this other date from 5 years ago. Instead, if you express your test as a day from now, yesterday, 5 days ago, that's where the today plus one. So using relative dates in your date setup, and that's parsed to the actual real time. So logic like if the invoice is more than 3 days old, do this kind of thing. That's just a trick to make the tests easier to write and read and understand later. That's been very successful over the years. So for you guys who haven't done a lot of Storyteller testing, there's quite a bit of power in how Storyteller interprets data. You can use little interpreter patterns so that you can set up data in whatever string makes sense to you and let Storyteller work on coercing that into whatever the appropriate internal data structure. Because you're really concerned here about specifying how the system's supposed to work without getting bogged down into details, class name, field names, database tables, and all that kind of stuff. That makes sense, Jack? Let's see, we talked about the Serenity integration. So I'm not yet sure. We're not going to know how much this is going to make a difference until we start trying to use the big projects against it. Just some things to try to do for speeding up the back end. The existing Storyteller 2, it's a little bit naive. It was built before we had task parallel libraries and people were really aware of multi-threading and multi-core boxes, or I was. So today when you're writing a big batch of specifications, it's doing everything in line in a single thread. It's reading the XML files, turning that into the right data structures, coercing data, actually running things, and building the HTML results. All that today is in line. As a way to try to speed things up, especially in the big batches, today that is now in Storyteller 3, that's very parallelized. So I'm just using a series of producer-consumer queues. So that in parallel, it can be reading spec data, and the first time it has a spec read up that's usable, kicks it onto the new place. Trying to do much more memoization internally of what to do when I carry out a grammar. So instead of hitting a grammar and then trying to figure out how do I convert data for myself, it already knows exactly what to do and just go. The creating the results is taken off into a separate thread, communicating to the client to a separate thread. So we can't necessarily run specs in parallel because of things like shared resources, but we can make sure that the thread that's actually running specifications is doing absolutely nothing but that as a way to try to speed this up. Some other things you guys do before this gets unleashed upon you. You need to be aware of this, and I know this is going to cause a little bit of rework here and there. The fixture objects and grammar objects, because they are a little bit expensive to build, there's a lot of reflection going on. Instead of just creating and destroying them every time, they're going to be reused. So inside of the testing app domain, there's only going to be one for each kind of fixture. So that's going to be something to be aware of when we're crafting the fixture classes. But that's a little bit of a performance thing. This might come up in a few places. There's I built a new conversion mechanism for the type coercion of turning strings into whatever the data really needs to be. Replace the old one in Fubu Core with something that's much lighter, do much more memoization. That might cause some trouble when we start moving things over. You guys already saw the performance tracing. And again, more background messaging. As the engine is running and doing things, it's sending you all those indications that are driving the progress bar and results like that. just making sure that all that kind of thing happens on a background thread instead of slowing down the engine, waiting to do all that work. All right, just trying to squeeze every possible little tiny bit of performance out we can. Talk about that. Just thinking more of the fixture and grammars, what I thought I would do. Scott, Sam, Jacob, I had already promised I'm going to try to do a full review of all the Storyteller tests in your project, using that to try to spot all the places that are awkward. Jacob, I know you hit some. I know Jacob hit some places where it was really awkward getting default values and selection. Try to just spot the problems. It'd be a great time if all those things you don't like about grammar and fixture creation, now would be a good time to throw issues on the Storyteller board. Talked about that. The XML file, the initial setup, it's all gone. It is purely convention-based now. You tell it the folder, it's going to look for the tests in a specs folder instead of tests. I need to document this, but the getting started story should be much easier. Technically, you don't even need a custom iSystem anymore. If it can't find one at all, it'll just use the default. It'll tell you that. But if there's only one Storyteller iSystem in the assembly that you're testing, it's just going to use that. So you don't have to specify it. All that's about is just trying to get things up faster. So we're looking here at the command line call. It should get to the point where if you're following normal .NET idioms, just run this folder and go. The XML editing, keeping the XML just the same, Lance. There are places, I'm going to guess that the drag and drop reordering might not be perfect before this is dropped for usage. But even so, even with that, there's still times when it's faster just to open the XML file and rearrange things as fast as you can. Not going to create any kind of XML editor screen. We could use a link on the page just to give you a little helper to open the file, but what I want to say is you're just going to use whatever editor you want to use, Sublime, Notepad++, whatever it is. Edit the spec in that. I do already have file system watchers on it so that it will refresh the browser as you change the file. So just punning, use whatever you want, and we're not even going to try to make an XML editor, especially when that crashed a lot in the old UI. So the killer question of when this will be ready, I don't know. We'll talk about it next. I'm hoping by the end of the month. No thoughts on that?
Good luck with that.
One that can be used in the existing projects.
I will not be the only person making the determination of when it's usable. Lance, my forte is whatever my forte and strength is as a developer. It's not really user interface kind of things. Kind of thank God for Bootstrap, so at least lines up okay. There's more things I can show, but that's all that I had to talk about today. Any last questions or anything else or requests?
I have a question. So the test cases are stored in the XML file. To generate that, you use the web GUI or some sort of GUI interface to do it. Have you considered alternative to that, such as Storyteller specific language? So people like developer, like people who don't want to use GUI to generate test stuff like on the fly faster.
I take pull requests.
That is the thing that he mentioned though earlier about creating a language. That was exactly what he was talking about.
So one of the things a lot of people complain about over the years, it's almost a pet peeve. People complain about that, but never come with concrete, actionable suggestions. Another idea we've talked about is having maybe a JavaScript language where you're making a series of JavaScript function calls, but it's really building up the data that Storyteller uses. The problem with doing that is I think it's going to be much less usable, and it's all going to be on you to get your syntax right. So just giving you a little more background, are you familiar with fitness at all? Or the fit testing tools? Okay. So Storyteller was designed to be a much better version of something called fitness. It was kind of a Gherkin-like tool way back when, where you specified tests in a wiki, and the engine could parse the wiki and how you put the table cells to connect that to the running code. What we saw at the time was our testers had a very hard time getting they're using the syntax that matched up with how we were parsing that data. So my concern with those kind of alternative languages is just that. It is the potential for doing it wrong. The UI was an attempt to guide the creation of the specs so that you really couldn't use the wrong syntax. That's just my thought on that. Steve?
So I don't really know the internals of how the XML generation works, but is there a reason that you couldn't just blow away the old XML and rewrite it from what's on the GUI every time it's saved?
That is what it does.
Okay. So I'm wondering why, like, the drag and drop stuff would be buggy if all it's doing is reading the thing and saying blam, new XML.
Google React.js drag and drop for a while.
Okay.
And you'll get it real fast.
Okay. Fair enough.
Andre?
Do you have any examples of a browser being open and run?
What's that?
Any example of tests that actually open a browser? Yeah.
Years ago, when I was a much younger developer, I got up to a bunch of business people, and I was showing a mock-up of what a new application would look like, and it was one of those deals where the UI was going to be very simple, but it had just probably 6 months worth of crazy integration work, and just showing what the UI is going to look like. And at the end of it, where the business partner steps up and asks me, "So, does your mock-up already integrate with the really nasty legacy inventory system?" And I said, "No, it's just a mock-up." No, I don't have a browser test in here. I was going to try to sprint and get Serenity converted last night, and that giant Angular conference that's here in town. So a couple of friends of mine were here for that, and I did that instead.
Understandable.
Not apologizing. What else? About it?
What kind of settings do you have, and is there a way to save those per user or per project, stuff like that? Because I know one of the pet peeves of mine is the timeout. Every time I'm debugging, it times out and completely freezes.
Let's hang on one second.
And I have to remember to go into the project and bump it up. And
Yeah, I might make you add that as a. And make sure it's actually applied, but it's at least it's a flag on the command line calls. So maybe just save a batch file or whatever you want to run it with whatever flags you want. Does that work?
yeah, that works.
I mean, this kind of thing, you could go forever and little thing, and I want to keep it this slimmer than the old Storyteller. The Storyteller at one point got up over 1,500 in unit tests, and I want to keep it smaller and lighter this time.
Some way to do that fast.
Depends on how good you are with command line stuff.
Perfect, that works.
Do you have a mock approach because of Edward?
I'm not gonna code that demo. I'll be testing that next week. What are you looking for?
Where the price is saved.
What do you want it to do?
Save it to the XML file.
Are you wanting it to? You wanting some record of how many times it was retried, or the retry event?
The number of, how to configure the number of retries.
Oh, it will be in the XML. That's some of the little stuff that's not quite there for the client, but you'll be editing into the client, or you can pop the XML open. It's just an attribute. This time around, though, it is spec by spec instead of being global.
So you briefly touched on it there in that comment. Is there any indication that you can see that a retry occurred in the test results?
No, and that would be a great idea. There's indication in the console, and it's not really a hard thing to do.
Okay. And that would also be great on the overview to see kind of like with the badges and stuff, having they filter by elements and how to retry.
Yeah, I like that. I get you to throw a GitHub issue into that.
Sure.
If you guys hit me up with a question and I said, yeah, that sounds like well, even if I didn't say it sounded like a good idea, could you just throw it in GitHub for me, please? And don't hesitate to put more stuff in GitHub. What else, guys?
Is this already?
Yeah, so I made a maintenance branch for Storyteller 2. So confusingly enough, this is the .NET side it's DarkFibVC Storyteller 2. The client side, so I had originally built this with some idea that the client could be engine agnostic. It is storyteller.js under my GitHub account. So I don't have the niceties up yet. I'm embedding the client-side stuff as a submodule inside of Storyteller 3. I need to get the reg task to do the delegation to set up the Git submodule type stuff. So I can make that a priority early next week so that other people could actually get this up and going. If you follow my Twitter account and I started whining about I'm letting a Git submodule back in my life after I said I would never do that again, so I was talking about this. And then we got the Rube Goldberg thing where we have reg delegating to NPM, to Gulp, to NuGet, to .NET, and all the fun stuff. All right, guys. Try to get this thing usable soon, or at least know what the big issues are. So don't hesitate to drop me a line with anything else you think of later, or better yet, put issues in GitHub. I quit.
Oh, Jeremy.
Yes, sir.
Or you watch first.
Well, let me shut this down first. Where's the stop button, Corey? Or is it just pause?
I think you're in a different window.
What's another window?
Command tab or command tilde. Switch.
What was that?
It's another window.
Um,
Command tilde. It's actually not one by your trash can.
Oh yeah, it's minimized.
oh.